Welcome to the Common Man Football Show. My name is James Coburn, and today's episode, we're going to be talking about the Detroit Lions versus Minnesota Vikings Week 4 matchup based on analytics. Each week, I collect all of the current 2017 NFL team data in order to analyze and project potential NFL performance. We're 3 weeks into the season, so it's not the biggest sample size ever at this point. However, there will always be little nuggets of truth in every sample of data you see, which could become bigger nuggets of truth as the season continues. So stick around as I analyze each week's matchups based on analytics. And if you're new to the channel, all terms and definitions will be in the description. So in terms of this matchup between the Lions and the Vikings, when you look at the NFL basic data, so this is just the basics when it comes to both of these teams, the data favors the Detroit Lions, surprisingly. Big sort of contributing factors to this is the Lions defense is a little bit better than the Vikings defense when it comes to preventing first downs. Over the last 3 weeks, that's been kind of the big bugaboo with the Vikings is in terms of preventing first downs, especially against the pass. I mean, I'm not talking about individual matchups. You know, I'm not talking about how well Xavier Rhodes did, or if the defense played better last week. Even I'm talking about over the course of the last 3 weeks, their defense has just not been performing as well as the Lions have performed. Now, it's also good to keep in mind that the Lions defense also had a fairly good start. You know, like they played a lot of weaker teams to begin the year before they actually faced the Falcons last week. But I do think that this is definitely something to not ignore or not factor in, because that's definitely something that's been kind of taken in. But the Vikings do have advantage when it comes to offense in terms of creating first downs, but overall it's pretty it's pretty evenly matched when it comes to offense and defense. But it is something to kind of add. It's something that contributes to the overall view of both these teams. Then, of course, when you look at turnover ratio, they're both pretty much the same. Both these teams don't really turn the football over that much. When you look at sack ratio, so the amount of sacks that are given up, the Lions actually give up more sacks than the Vikings up to this point. And when you look at offensive score percentage, the Vikings actually have an advantage when it comes to that particular matchup. So the Vikings, on average, score on more drives that they have than the Lions do. And again, if you're putting up points on, if you have drives and you put up more points per drive than another guy, then you're going to put up more points. If you put up more points and you prevent more points, then you're going to win more football games. Then when you look at the defensive side of the ball, the Vikings defense, again, when it comes to scoring, so this is something that doesn't get talked about a lot about, but the fact of the matter is the Vikings defense, despite some of the positive things about it, I think it's a very talented defense. I think they have a ton of guys. Xavier Rhodes, cool. Harrison Smith, amazing. But I think to start this year, they've just not been doing well when it comes to preventing scores on every single offensive drive that they face. And that is largely why the Lions are favored in this particular matchup, data-wise, is because of that fact. Is because the Vikings defense has not been preventing points. And, again, elite defenses prevent points. That's what they do. And up to this point, the Vikings have not really been playing like an elite defense that prevents points. They've been playing more so as a average defense that does a couple things really well. So that's kind of just the basic tenets of that. The Lions defense has also been very good when it comes to creating turnovers as a defense versus the Vikings. The Lions have also been better when it comes to creating sacks as a defense compared to the Vikings. And when it comes to interceptions, again, which also speaks to kind of turnover ratio, but the Lions have also been pretty good when it comes to interception ratio. Creating turnovers puts the ball in the offense's hands. So, that's just something to kind of consider there as well. When you look at special teams data, the Lions have advantages when it comes to punt return yardage, whereas the Vikings have advantages when it comes to kick return yardage. When it comes to defending kick return yardage, the Vikings actually have advantages in terms of preventing punt return yardage and preventing kick return yardage. So the Lions, again, are pretty good when it comes to punt returns on special teams. The Vikings are good in terms of kick returns. And when it comes to preventing punt returns and kick returns, the Vikings actually have advantages when it comes to that. And then when you look at field goal percentage pretty much even. Extra point percentage, I can't really put a reason why, but the Vikings extra point percentage has not been that great compared to the Lions up to this point this year. So that's been somewhat of issues in terms of extra point percentage. Punting average for both these teams are below average when it comes to punting average, but I'd say it's pretty evenly matched. It slightly favors the Vikings, but it's pretty evenly matched. But again, over the last 3 weeks, because the biggest thing you have to understand about this data, it's not about what happened last week. It's about what happened over the course of 3 weeks. And over the course of 3 weeks, the Lions as a whole have been performing better than the Vikings. Will that change this week? Well, let's get into some other sort of data to kind of think about, to ponder that question. So when you look at completion percentage data, the Lions have advantages when it comes to first down situations, but not so much when it comes, second down situations, but not so much when it comes to first down situations or third down situations when it comes to completion percentage. When you look at the flip side, so the Vikings offense versus the Lions defense, the Lions defense has advantages when it comes to first down situations, but the Vikings overwhelmingly have advantages when it comes to second down situations and third down situations. So the Vikings will have advantages on their offense, and the Lions will also have some advantages when it comes to their offense, when it comes to completion percentage. When you look at rushing data, the Lions, unfortunately, are going up against a pretty dang good Minnesota Vikings defense when it comes against the run, especially when it comes to first down situations. The Vikings, have been one of the best defenses in the NFL when it comes to preventing first downs with the run in terms of first down situations. Not so good when it comes to second down situations, but definitely good when it comes to third down situations. So this pretty much favors the Vikings defense. The Vikings defense has been pretty dang good when it comes to preventing first downs with the run. It's just the pass has been kind of somewhat of their issue, and we'll get to that a little bit later. Then when you look at the Vikings offense versus the Detroit Lions defense, when it comes to the Vikings offense's ability to create first downs on first down, first downs on second down, and first downs on third down, it favors the Vikings. The Lions defense has not been exceptionally amazing when it comes to their overall rushing defense in terms of preventing first downs. So this does favor the Vikings. It is something to kind of think about, if this is going to trend up or down. Because, despite the fact Dalvin Cook has definitely been very good, he's been getting a lot of yardage and all this other kind of stuff, his efficiency, the offense as a whole's efficiency, I should say, it shouldn't be all on Dalvin Cook, but the rushing offense as a whole of the Vikings has not been the most efficient. But I don't think that'll matter because the Lions defense is not exactly the best when it comes to rushing situations. Then when you get to passing situations, so again, this is kind of what I'm talking about. When it comes to the Vikings in terms of preventing first downs with the pass on first downs, not very good over the last 3 weeks. Not very good when it comes to second down situations. The only advantages that the Vikings actually have is in terms of third down situations. So the Vikings have very much been sort of a bend but don't break type of passing defense, if you will. And I think that it's more so of an evenly matchup thing, but I do think this might be a crucial thing for the Vikings, because if the Vikings can win on third down because of the Lions having issues in terms of third down, I think that'll be a very important sort of matchup to look at in this game when it comes to the passing game. Then when you look at the Minnesota Vikings offense versus the Detroit Lions defense when it comes to passing, it favors the Vikings in terms of second down situations and third down situations. And again, some of this is because of Sam Bradford. This Case Keenum and Sam Bradford, we don't really know if there's a mixture here, because Sam Bradford, of course, is not playing for them anymore. This is mostly a mixture of Sam Bradford and Case Keenum. So again, that's another sort of variable sort of issue with this data. But again, despite all that stuff, the Lions would definitely have advantages when it comes to first down situations, but not so much when it comes to second down and third down. So again, this overwhelmingly favors the Vikings offense when it comes to passing situations. Then, of course, when we switch to sack situations, in terms of the sack rate of the Detroit Lions, they've been pretty decent in terms of preventing sacks on first down situations and third down situations, but second down situations have been some of the biggest issues for them. However, the Vikings have just not been able to get a lot of sacks this year. Some of that is because they played the Saints. The Saints, if you've actually seen the Saints video, the Saints have been pretty good in terms of preventing sacks. Again, I just think some of this is because of the matchups they've had. But I can't just say that. I can't just make excuses. The Vikings have just not been able to put up a ton of sacks up to this point in terms of these situations. But I do think there is opportunities when it comes to second down situations. So that's the sort of thing I should say. But overall, this does favor the Lions. When you look at the sack rate for the Vikings offense versus the Lions defense, the Vikings do have advantages when it comes to first down situations, second down situations, and even third down situations, although it is more of an evenly matched sort of situation when it comes to second down. But overall, I do give this to the Vikings. Despite some of the talent that the Lions have on the defense, they just are not really the second kind of defense in terms of their impact over the last 3 weeks. Then when we get to interception ratio, so the Lions versus the Vikings. The Vikings have not done well in terms of creating interceptions on first down, third down situations, but they have been very proficient in terms of second down situations. This does favor the Vikings in terms of interception. In terms of situational stuff, it does favor the Lions. However, not the Lions, but the Vikings. But I do think that, again, most of the passes come on from first down situations, and the Vikings have not really been able to force the issue in terms of first down situations. So this is something that's still to monitor, but this is definitely an advantage for the Vikings when it comes to second down situations, especially when it comes to interception ratio. And then finally, when you look at the Minnesota Vikings offense versus the Lions defense when it comes to interceptions, the Vikings have an advantage when it comes to third down situations. But first and second down definitely favors the Lions, and a lot of that is because of how well the Lions have played up to this point through the last 3 weeks, with, of course, the 2 big games to start the year. Those 2 games really did help their sort of interception ratio out. So they do have guys who are ball hawks. They do have guys that can create interceptions and turnovers. But I do think that, for the most part, the Vikings do have, pretty decent sort of advantages overall when you look at the overall sort of data scheme. So, overall, how do I feel about this matchup, from a data kind of perspective? Well, in terms of who wins and stuff like that, my gut tells me that the Vikings are going to win this game. And I say that because despite the data favoring the Lions, I just look at a lot of this data favoring the Lions. The Lions is from 2 games this year against fairly weak opponents. The New York Giants are one of the worst teams in the NFL through 3 weeks. So it shouldn't be surprising that they were able to play so well against them. And then, of course, the very first team they faced that was legitimately, a contender, it's the Falcons. They were the Super Bowl representatives, after all. And they ended up, unfortunately, losing that game and didn't really play as well as they could have played in the previous games. So I really don't know how to, I would say it's a pretty evenly matched sort of thing. I think the Vikings, a lot of stuff that's been hurting the Vikings is because of some of the matchups they played to begin the year, and maybe they slowly get better into stuff. But yeah, I don't really know how I feel about this game because I think both sides have some advantages here and there. I do think that the Vikings have some advantages when it comes to situational turnovers per se. But yeah, I mean, it's just really hard. But yeah, again, the data prefers the Lions. I'm slightly for the Vikings, but this is definitely going to be a game that I think will sort some of the stuff out in terms of figuring out who are the Vikings really as a team and who are the Lions really as a team. Because I think this is like the first matchup that'll really start to answer that central question, because I don't think what's happened over the last 3 weeks has really helped to answer that question out that much. To a certain extent. So I think this will be a very big game to kind of cement, what's what. So again, data favors Lions, but I'm going Vikings in this one. And of course, my name is James Coburn. You can find my work at draftcoburn.wordpress.com. You can also follow me on Twitter at Geometrics. And if you like this content and you want more content like this, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. Share this video as well if anybody that you know, and I'll talk to you guys in the next video. Peace.